My name is Andre, and I'd like to welcome all of you to the second of our spring lecture series that is celebrating 100 years of the Chicago Zoological Society. The spring lecture series is brought to us by the Chicago Zoological Society Associates. Before we begin, I do have a few announcements. First, the mute button will be engaged this evening to ensure a smooth flow of our presentation. Second, question and answer will take place after the presentation. You can start to think of your questions during the presentation, put them in the Q&A box, and I will moderate questions with Dr. Watts once the presentation is over. Finally, I'd like to give a special thank you to everyone who donated and contributed to Brookfield Zoo when they registered for this evening's event. However, if you did not donate and you wish to support Brookfield Zoo, you can do so by visiting us at czs.org and looking for the donate button. With that, I'd like to introduce a member of the CZS Associates and a member of the CZS Associates Outreach Team. Please help me welcome Carrie Locke.
Hello and welcome. The CZS Associates are delighted to present the Spring Lecture Series. We are a group of young professionals from Chicago and the surrounding suburbs who are interested in animal welfare, conservation, and furthering the mission of CZS and Brookfield Zoo. The Associates provide our members with growth opportunities and great benefits in addition to professional and social networking. We gather virtually or in person for after-work functions, special events, family-friendly activities, and popular behind-the-scenes opportunities at the zoo. If you would like to learn more, please go to www.czs.org/associates. My name is Katie Locke, and I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Jennifer Watts, CZS's Director of Nutrition. Dr. Watts has been with the Brookfield Zoo for 13 years and is one of only a handful of graduate-level zoological nutritionists. She graduated with honors from Cornell University and earned her PhD at Clemson University. Her work at CZS focuses on developing more natural diets, contributing to research in the field, and providing diet reviews and problem solving for our collection. Tonight, Dr. Watts will share with us the research behind diet development for exotic animals. Please join me in welcoming her.
Thank you very much. So I will start by sharing my screen and we will get started. So before I actually get into the presentation, I'd like to just touch on a little bit about what Katie said in regards to there just being a handful of zoo nutritionists. Brookfield's very lucky in that we've had a nutrition program since the mid-80s, but even as of today, only approximately 10% of AZA accredited zoos have a graduate level nutritionist on staff. Now that surprises a lot of people because we all know how important nutrition is to good health and welfare. But unfortunately, that's just it. We haven't gotten the traction yet to show everyone how important it is for our animals in our care. But for those of us that are involved in zoo nutrition, of which there's probably about 25 or 26 of us in North America, we are a very dedicated group. We talk to each other all the time. We meet often, and we try to help each other out as much as possible. Like I said, Brookfield's had a program here since the mid-80s. I've been lucky enough to participate and be running the department for the last 13 years. And I hope that you enjoy my presentation tonight. So first, we're going to start off with making sure that this goes the way it's supposed to. There we go. So who are we? I'm going to start a little bit of talking about our commissary and its operations, because that's the core of getting the food to the animals, and then talk a little bit more about closer to what I do, which is formulating diets. So we have myself, the Director of Nutrition. I have one lead keeper, 3 senior keepers, and 1 keeper. Now, these keepers are very well trained, and we have a very efficient team in the building. So what do? We formulate diets and modify diets, both by creating them and reviewing them. So that's kind of more of what I do. My staff prepares diets, they distribute them along with operating supplies, and they maintain an inventory of all of our food and operating supplies. So not only are we responsible for providing the diets for the animals, but we also make sure that all the buildings and animal areas have what they need. Since we deliver to every animal building every day, 7 days a week, we also provide them with things that they need to keep their end of the business going. So every day of the week, one or two departments has that day where they can order dish detergent and brooms and paper towels and all those things they need to supply themselves up for the week. So we are managing both those sides of the operation. So about my building is an original 1927 building. It has always been the commissary. So the unfortunate thing is with that is it was built for a collection of 300 animals, and now we have 3,000. So I'll talk a little bit about how that kind of limits us in a minute. Our building has 2 storage rooms and a walk-in cooler and freezer. For some of the items that we purchase, we don't have enough room in our freezer, so we rent space from a cold storage facility, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. We also have a very nice barn for our hay. It's up on the northwest corner of the zoo. If you drive out, if you go past 31st Street, past the conservation barn and keep going west, we're back there. And it's a really nice building. It's covered, it's enclosed, and we can fit about probably 4 to 5 semi-truck loads full of hay. So it's a very big building, and that's necessary because we go through a lot of hay. So as I mentioned, one of the limitations of our building being so small is that we can't make all the diets for each individual animal. It's just not possible. What we do though is we make, for those diets that we can make for individual animals, we do a every other day, we make 2 days worth of diets in our kitchen. So if we were making the diets for our animals in the pachyderm building, starting say tomorrow is Wednesday, we'd be making the diets for Thursday and Friday. So that way those 2 days of diets are done. We can put them in the cooler to be delivered tomorrow, Thursday, to be delivered Thursday and Friday. And then on Thursday, we do a different set of duties, again, preparing for 2 days worth of diet. So it works out that we can split our responsibilities over a 2-day duration. So what that means is that we have both a centralized and a decentralized kitchen and operations. Centralized being that all the food comes into the commissary, we touch everything that goes in and out. So we have very good control over what goes in and out. There are some zoos, probably a lot of zoos, where the commissary is not very well monitored and keepers are allowed to just come and grab what they think they need. Well, that's very unorganized, and it will mess up inventory, and it also doesn't allow for the proper diets to be fed to the animals. So the curator previous to myself made it very clear to keepers that they were not allowed to come to the commissary unless it was a case of an emergency. So we will go and deliver everything to the buildings, whether it be normal delivery or an emergent situation. We'll go and get and do those things. It also helps with keeping our building clean, that we don't have to worry about keepers tromping in and out of our building and potentially bringing things from their building into ours. And decentralized means that we deliver a lot of things in bulk because we don't have the ability to make the diets individually. So with that, we have every day we fill these very big blue bins with all of the produce that every area needs. And then on those weekly orders that each area puts in, they'll order the bags, the 50-pound bags of feed that they need to also fulfill the diet recipe that I've set up for each animal. So it requires a lot of trust on my part for the keepers to feed the diet that I've prescribed for each animal. And I came into a very wonderful situation here because, like I said, Brookfield's had a nutrition department for 35 years. And all of the keepers here have professionally grown up with a nutritionist on staff. So they know what I'm trying to accomplish. They are very meticulous about their records and the nutrition and making sure that they don't give anything that they're not supposed to. So I have an excellent team throughout the zoo for feeding the animals. It can be very difficult for my colleagues who have started nutrition programs at zoos because they often have to fight the keepers and the curators because change is hard. And when you have somebody telling you something that you fed your animal for the last 15 years is not really that good for them, that can sometimes be hard to hear, and it can make things a little bit tough. But like I said, I came into a very excellent team here. Our schedule, like I said, is the every other day schedule and makes everything very efficient. My team is very efficient. Some of them have been together for more than 20 years and they work very well together. So I'm very proud of my team. So in the sense of what do we have available to us to feed, I'm going to go through some different feed options and categories and just kind of talk about them a little bit so you kind of have an idea when I'm talking later on in the presentation what I'm talking about and kind of get the diversity and the full view of what we have to offer. So a complete formulated diet, which I may refer to as chow or pellets, is just that. It's a complete formulated diet. It's usually an extruded or pressed pellet that has all the vitamins and minerals that the animals need. There are multiple different types of these diets. Like it says here, we have almost 80 different items in stock, and they're tailored for different species of animals. There is a company called Missouri, which is a subsidiary of Purina. They were really the first company to get into exotic animal nutrition. So that's all they focus on. We have another company that we use out of Plano, Illinois, as a nice local company that we support called New Zoo, and he provides us with some diet items also. I want my animals to eat complete formulated diets because that way I know they're getting all of the micronutrients that they need, as much as that we know what they're supposed to get. So almost every animal in the collection gets some sort of complete formulated diet. It's difficult sometimes to get animals to eat them because they're a little bit boring. So I make adjustments for that. And the only other concern that I have with them is they're very energetically dense, meaning there's a lot of calories and a little bit of food. And for our animals who normally would spend 80% of their waking time looking for food, having something that's very energetically dense is not ideal because they could eat all their calories and then they're done for the day and they don't have that foraging opportunity to take up their time. So I have to learn to manage how to get them as much complete diet as they need to meet their nutrient requirements, but as little as they need calorically. So it's a little bit of a balancing act. And of course, not all animals like it. Some love it. It's a personality trait of the animals. I like to tell people, all animals have taste buds. They certainly tell me what they like and don't like. And it's kind of like I feed about 3,000 toddlers. I sometimes have to play that kind of hardball with them sometimes to get them to eat what I want them to eat. The next item is produce. Now, the produce that we receive, we get it 2 times a week. It's the same produce that a restaurant would get or potentially a grocery store. The only difference is we don't need our apples to look perfect. They still need to be good. We don't accept bruised or damaged items, but when you go to a restaurant, you expect your baked russet potato to be nice and round and oval, or oval and long and look very nice. Our animals don't care what they look like. So we're able to kind of get the less fancy kind, saves us a little bit of money, and it's still the same product. So here on this slide, you can see approximately how much of all the some different produce items that we use over the course of a year. We go through a lot of food. Our cooler is not very big, which is one of the reasons why we receive produce twice a week. The other is to make sure that it stays fresh. Greens especially, we go through a lot, and that can tend to go bad more quickly than some other items like apples and potatoes and those things. And it's very important because this is where we have our opportunity for variety. So as I'm trying to fill calories for these animals, that I'm trying to use as little amount of the complete feed as possible so that I have the opportunity to have as many calories as possible to use with low calorie items such as produce. This allows us the ability to change over the course of a week what animals receive. Most of our animals are on a rotation of either a fruit, a vegetable, and a green. So say on Monday they get apples, Tuesday they get grapes, and Wednesday they get bananas. And then they get carrots, tomatoes, and cucumber. And so it changes all the time. So that way they don't get the same diet every single day, because that is very boring. It also gives me the opportunity to then help them feel more satiated with that lower amount of calories. This is important again for their behavioral health, that we don't want them feeling hungry but not giving them a lot of calories because they are not moving as much as they would in their natural habitat. So produce is really important. It serves a lot of purposes. And as you see, we spend about $200,000. It's one of the largest portions of my budget is to produce. Hay is our next very big diet feed item, of course, for all of our hoof stock and sometimes for our primates as well. We have two main types of hay, and that is grass and alfalfa. Grass hay is what you feed to grazers. So those are animals that are like lawnmowers. They just eat and eat and eat and eat. They usually eat poorer quality forage, but they eat a lot more of it to make up for the fact that it's not as good a quality. Alfalfa, on the other hand, is a high quality legume hay that is very leafy, and it's specifically for browsers. So they will eat, browsers eat the leaves off of trees. They're very picky, like giraffe and okapi and gerenuk, that they have that tongue that they use to just get the fresh leaves off of trees and shrubs and those and items such as that. So the alfalfa is more appropriate for them. Grass hay is more appropriate for grazers. We have several types of grass hay for our different types of grazers. Our bison specifically get a brome grass hay. Now, I like to call that my bad hay. It's not bad in any sense of the word, other than it's very, very high in fiber. What that allows the bison to do is eat more of it, but they don't digest it, so it passes through them. Thus, they don't get as much energy from it, but they do feel satiated. Bison can tend to be overweight because they want to eat all day long. So giving them a diet item that they don't digest very well allows them to feel full, but not give them the same amount of calories as if they were eating a higher quality feed item. So we use about 40 tons each year. That's about 2 semi-truckloads full. Oh, I'm sorry, I gotta go back to my grass hay. So we have brome grass hay for our bison. We use mostly mixed grass hay, which is a Timothy grass mixed with orchard grass and brome. And that goes to most of our animals, other grass-eating, grazing animals. And then for our macropods, which is the group name for kangaroos and wallabies, we give them an orchard grass hay. It's a much finer stemmed, softer hay that we can use for them to help protect their teeth. In that it's a nice soft hay. They have a little bit more sensitive teeth, and that's a better hay for them to consume. So Within grass hay, we divide it up into several different types so that we make it as appropriate for each animal species as necessary. Moving on to carnivores, all carnivores that we have get a nutritionally complete zoo diet. So this is just like it's also considered a complete formulated feed, except it's meat-based. It has all the nutritional vitamins and minerals that the animals need. One of the downsides to it, though, is it is ground meat. So it's very soft. And as you might know, if you have cats or dogs, your vet does not usually suggest that you feed your dogs simply wet food, because that can lead to continued buildup of tartar if they don't have anything hard to chew on. So we also use shank bones, shaved bones, and ribs as means to give the animals that opportunity to have a bone to chew on to help clean their teeth. So almost every animal in the zoo has 1 day a week where they get bones, and sometimes it's 2 days a week, but we always make sure that we supply them with that opportunity to have those chewing availability for them to help clean their teeth. We use about 45,000 pounds of that nutritionally complete meat a year. One of the things that we're working on here is to increase the natural feeding of our animals. So in carnivores, that means that we're increasing the use of carcasses. There's a lot of benefits to carcasses. One of them is which it allows our animals to do natural behaviors, both socially and physically. It allows them to have different parts and learn how to rip apart a carcass. Most of the animals that receive carcasses the most are our Mexican gray wolves, and they actually will get a whole white-tailed deer, usually every other or every 3 weeks. We definitely fast them beforehand and fast them afterwards because they can eat a lot of meat. But especially when we have puppies, this is important because the adults can then teach the puppies how to assess and rip apart a carcass. We also use carcasses for our African painted dogs. This wheel one, we actually put on a zip line. So they have to jump and grab and tear. And so it really helps out with the physicality of ripping apart a carcass and working for it. Our other carnivores, which are fish eaters, a little bit different prey item, but we use about 160,000 pounds a year. And we have to use several different kinds of fish. And one of the reasons is that for many species of fish, they're only caught once a year. And there is never a guarantee that it's going to be a good catch. So sometimes some species of animals are very particular about what they eat. So if we only fed them one type of fish, and that fish that year had a terrible catch, and we can't get the supply that we would normally get, some animals would then turn their nose up if we tried to give them a different fish, because that's not what they're used to. So for all of our fish eating species, we feed them at least 2, but optimally 3 different species of fish. So just for our making sure that if something were to happen to our supply, our animals would not go off fish. Also, we try to give our animals both a high fat fish and a lean fish. This is important for our marine mammals, in where we maintain their body weight and behavior through calorie changes, not necessarily just how much they're getting. The keepers over at Marine Mammals are very, very meticulous about how many calories their animals are getting and in what ratio the fish should be to get the best behavior out of our animals for their health. Fish also need to be supplemented specifically with vitamin E and thiamine, because those both break down very quickly, especially if they're frozen for a long period of time. Now, like I said, these fish can only be caught once a year, so they can be frozen for up to a year. So that gave us the reasons to implement all marine mammal, fish-eating species, even penguins and otters, and anybody who has a majority of their diet as fish is thus supplemented with thiamine and vitamin E. As I stated with our meat-eating carnivores trying to move to more natural diets, we've been working with our marine mammals to move them towards more native fish. So for our dolphins, this includes, we've tried many different kinds of fish, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But right now, we're using menhaden, ladyfish, and for our sea lions, we're using some capelin, some herring, and then sardines, which is a more native fish for Pacific sardines for the Pacific California sea lions, especially. Fish can be an expensive diet item, but it's very necessary and it's very important for all of our fish-eating animals. Then moving on to whole prey. So whole prey is what we classify both insects and frozen mammalian prey that we get. So that includes rats, rabbits, guinea pigs. We do get both chicks, day-old chicken chicks, and quail chicks. And we use over 6 million crickets and mealworms. We also get waxworms, hornworms, and butterworms. Unfortunately, since we're here talking about insects, insectivores or insect-eating animals are some of the hardest animals to feed because we cannot have diet items that are commercially available that are appropriate for them. As you might have heard, many of the things that are available to them are worms. And this is not necessarily appropriate for an animal that eats beetles or ants or termites. Those soft-bodied worms are not appropriate for them. We supplement them as needed. We try our best, but it's just as a general experience that all of us zoo nutritionists go through is that insectivorous animals are just not fed optimally as we would want them to be, as we could. So I've told kids when I do tours, if anybody's an entrepreneur, start up a good termite farm and you would have zoos clamoring for all of your product. Other items that we utilize are dry goods, just regular non-perishable goods like applesauce and cereal, rice, all sorts of different things. We have canned items. We use a lot of canned fruit and vegetables for our fruit-eating birds. The ability for them, we used to use frozen, like frozen carrots and things like that, but those are very hard even when they're thawed, and it's harder for the birds to be able to smush it between their beaks like they like to do. They masticate it with their beaks and break it into smaller pieces. They can do that a lot better with canned items, so we use those in our bird mixes. Lots of different kinds of supplements. For the most part, zoo nutritionists have a good handle on the macronutrients, which are protein, fat, fiber, and sugars. It's the micronutrients, the vitamins and the minerals that are very difficult for us to figure out. For a lot of our animals, I can say that safely we oversupplement most of them because we don't want to run the risk of a deficiency. We can't do studies on our animals and make them deficient or make them toxic because that's not good for their health. And yet that's where we have the most problems. So we have an entire shelf full of different kinds of supplements because different animals need different combinations and different amounts, and it varies by species. So there's a lot of little supplements going on for a lot of our animals that maybe the complete formulated feed doesn't quite meet because that animal has a species specific difference that's different than its related cohorts. Lots of enrichment. I'll show you some fun pictures later on, but enrichment is very important for our animals, and because most of them are motivated by food, food tends to be the major form of enrichment. We do use scents, we do use different puzzles and textures and other kinds, but most of it is driven by food. So I work very closely with our behavioral curator and the keepers to maximize the enrichment, that they can have the flexibility to do and use what food items they would like, that their animals like, and yet not interfere with their diet composition or energy needs. I won't talk about formula, but it's something I like for people to understand that I still have to do whenever we have a mammal that is going to give birth. We have to be ready to hand rear that animal. Hopefully it won't happen, but we always have to be prepared. So I have to figure out, using past papers and research and under analysis of milk that's been available to analyze, to be able to try to make the correct protein, fat, lactose type of components for that milk. So you think about how many different mammal species not only do I have to feed, but then I have to be ready to get their formula prepared for them if they do become pregnant. All right, moving on to how I formulate diets, and we'll just kind of go quickly through some steps. The first is kind of where do you start? Well, we start with free-ranging diet information. That's the gold standard of how to determine what's the best diet for our animals under managed care. Now, in the past, before zoo nutrition really became an established field, researchers would just note in their field notes or in their paper, oh, we saw the animal eating leaves and fruit. That was good to know, because at that time we were still learning very much about the natural history of the animals. But for us as zoo nutritionists, we like numbers, we like math. I do a lot of math. And we wanted to know what percentage of their diet is fruit, what percentage of their diet is leaves. And can you bring some back and analyze it, so that way we can figure out, okay, if it's 70% fruit and the fruit contains X amount of protein, that's how much protein we think they need. And that way, once we figure out what nutrient percentages their diet contains, we can then modify our diets to meet those percentages, because there's no way we can copy an animal's wild diet. It's just not possible. So the next best thing we can do is copy its nutrient percentages and use that as our template for modifying the diet from there. A little anatomy class, we have to look at the gastrointestinal tract as well to understand what these animals had evolved to eat. So here on the left is a dog intestinal tract, and as you can see, as most carnivores are, it's just a straight tube. There's not much going on in terms of fermentation, because protein and fat are very easily digestible, they're easily absorbed. There doesn't need to be a lot of fermentation going on. Now, for both sheep here in the middle and horses on the right, there needs to be a lot of fermentation that goes on. And what I mean by that is both these types of animals are herbivores. They eat grasses mostly, and grass is made up of cellulose. Plants use cellulose to make their cell walls. Well, animals cannot break down cellulose. Only bacteria can. So what these types of animals have evolved to do is come up with different ways to give the bacteria time to break down that cellulose and make the energy available for the animal. So in sheep and cows and other animals that you may have heard had 4 stomachs, they honestly don't. They have one stomach that has 4 different compartments. It's 1, 2, 3, 4. And they do all of their fiber digestion before the rest of their gastrointestinal tract. So once all the fiber is broken down, the animal can then use that energy and all those nutrients and get the nutrients out of the food. Horses, on the other hand, and some other non-ruminant animals have taken to developing their colon, their cecum, and other things in the large intestinal area, and then they absorb the nutrients from there. So they do it post hindgut or post gastric or hindgut. And those are what the term is for animals that digest after their stomach. We can also look at known domestic species and having to extrapolate from those. So a lot of our big cats and dogs, we can use domestic cat and dog requirements to get an idea. There's not a lot of extrapolation necessary, but when you start talking about fish-eating species or insect-eating species, even if you look at mammalian prey for reptiles, all of those require a lot of extrapolating assumptions and kind of a try it and figure out and see if it works, and if it doesn't, go back and try again. Unfortunately, that's kind of how zoo nutrition is, because there's so much we don't know, that a lot of it is trial and error. So we, again, like with we know a lot about domestic cows. Unfortunately, domestic cows, their nutrient requirements are based on them producing milk or meat. So we can't use their exact nutrient requirements because they require too much energy to produce that milk. But we can use them as a basis for all of our grazing animals. And then I have chickens on here just because they're the most studied bird. Again, they would only be useful for grain-eating animals, grain-eating birds. But when we're talking about fruit-eating birds or meat-eating birds or nectar or any other different kind of feeding strategy, we can't use chickens. We have to make very educated tries and move on from there. Knowing the, so as we're getting from the species level now down to the animal level, we have to know each animal's physiological status. Are they geriatric? Are they pregnant? Are they growing? Any of those things changes their energy needs, changes their nutritional needs. And so now we're getting down into the nitty-gritty of treating each animal as its own individual. So that's very important. Even when you've got animals in a group setting, you still need to try to manage each individual's physiological state and their individual needs. That also has to go with their health status. I always do a disclaimer that this little prairie dog is not one of our animals. That was a picture I got off the internet, but it went well with my giving a little bit of a talk about obesity. So just quickly about obesity, it's not a large problem here at Brookfield Zoo. We have implemented and stressed how important it is to weigh our animals regularly. It's one of the first things that our animals are trained to do. And because it's the least invasive way we have of measuring their health. If their weight starts to go down and it's not something that we can explain, something's wrong. So we don't have a lot of problems with obesity. I do body condition scoring on all of our animals at least 3 times a year, where I visually go around the zoo and talk with the lead keepers and the curators and assess every animal visually. And then whenever we have an animal being anesthetized over at the hospital, I really try to get over there and get a hands-on body condition. Because some animals like binturong and fennec foxes are really fluffy. And so it's very hard visually to get a good assessment of their body condition. But animals that have been through surgery or are sick and don't feel like eating, I work very, very closely with the veterinary department to help with those cases and try to get the animals back on the right track. And then we have to look at management considerations. So what I mean by that is, how are the animals managed on a day-to-day basis? So up here on the upper right, we've got one of our bears training. So training is a very big part of an animal's day, of what keepers need to do. It's part of their job. And it's usually we're training behaviors that help with the animal's health overall. It allows us to see, if they open their mouth, we can see their teeth. If they put their paws up on the glass, we can see the bottoms of their feet and their claws, and their belly, and just to be able to assess our animals in a better manner. So training is very important, and training items, one of the things that I instituted when I came on was that training items need to come out of the diet. They can't be quote unquote extras, because those calories are then not thought of when I'm making the diet, and then they're getting all this extra stuff and I don't know why they're gaining weight. Down here on our African painted dogs, I put this in here to talk about activity levels. When we have puppies, they are very, very active and they're moving all the time. So they need extra energy to be able to maintain that type of movement, versus some other animals that are very sedate and stay in the same place. And even though the math equations may say I need to give them this amount of energy just based on their behavior and their personality, I might have to cut it by 20% because they don't move around a lot. And then with the giraffes, this reminds me to talk about social aspects of group feeding. Group feeding animals can be very difficult because within every group there's a dominant animal and subordinate animals. So the dominant animal tends to dominate the feeding areas. So in the past, we used to have some overweight animals and some underweight animals. We've really, really tried here to take the high calorie items that our animals are offered in their diet and be able to target feed them directly. So we've taught a lot of our animals to separate for a certain period of time. They get their yummy food items, and then we put them back together for the rest of their diet that they can eat cooperatively. Most of them work very well for that, and it helps us target those calories to the correct animal. So what foods are available is a big question. Commercial diets, commercial domestic produce. One of the things that's very important to understand about domestic produce is that we've genetically changed it to meet our tastes, which means it's not the same as a wild fruit anymore. Domestic fruits are much higher in sugar, water, and lower in fiber. A very good example is if you just compare a Honeycrisp to a crabapple. You'd much rather eat that Honeycrisp because it's sweeter and moister than a crabapple. We have to make sure that all the diets are nutritionally balanced, and that can also be affected by what the animal eats, because what we put into the animal's area is not necessarily what they're going to eat. So it's very important for me to communicate with the keepers, because the keepers know what the animals are eating and what they're not, so that we can make adjustments if I need them to eat more of one item versus another. Seasonal diets are important, especially for our brown bears. This is a pet project of mine. When I started here at Brookfield Zoo, my boss at the time said, we need to get the brown bears back down in weight. So I have a graph here, and with bears, the seasonality of their diet is ginormous. With other animals, we do make changes in terms of the feeds that they are offered in spring versus fall. We make changes to the hay that our hoof stock are eating. We make changes to the produce that's offered for our primates. A lot of our animals are on seasonal diets, but the biggest one is our bears. So because I'm very proud of the work that we've done here, I have a graph here that shows, if you look back down here, this is from 1998. And you see the bears are going up and down, but you look at the trend and they're still trending up to the point where Axie weighed over 1,200 pounds, which is a lot. He was a very heavy bear. And then after I implemented the seasonal diets, which was about 2007, 2008, you can see we've gotten them very nicely into a pattern within a weight goal range that we've set for them. For both winter ranges and summer ranges. Browse is very important. We have had a partnership with ComEd for the last 10 years. We're going into our 11th year this season, where they bring tree trimmings that they've trimmed from around power lines to help prevent power outages. It's what they normally do. And in the past, these branches would have been chipped. Well, I thought, well, we could definitely use these tree branches and get the fresh leaves for our animals. So we approached ComEd and they were very happy to help us. And we gave them a list of what trees are okay for them to bring and what are not. They have a certified arborist on staff who identifies those species for them. And twice a week during the summer, they bring us a big truck full of cut tree branches, and all of our animals can enjoy browse now during the summer. We also have implemented a program where we take branches and we vacuum seal them and freeze them, so that way we have some browse available to us in the winter as well, because ComEd provides so much browse for us where we have the ability to be able to save some for the winter. Enrichment is one of the fun parts of my job. So sometimes it can be items like here, we have Isis playing with some pumpkins. Could be things that they won't eat, but it's something novel, something that they can play with. And it doesn't necessarily have to be something that's ingested. But we do have items like here's, and we'll probably be doing this in another 3 years when the cicadas come up. Here's a bearded dragon eating a cicada. I'm sure I will get many questions in 2024 for how many cicadas can I feed my animals. Down here on the bottom left, we have one of our Mexican gray wolves eating some bison ribs. We provide bison ribs to our Mexican gray wolves because that is a species of prey that they are allowed to eat. The SSP for Mexican gray wolves is very strict about what they can and cannot eat because they are potentially reintroduced species. I also have one of our fishing cats here taking an eye on a baby salmon that we put in a pool for him to hunt and eat. Sometimes it's fun stuff, still made up of diet items, but here's one of our mongoose lemurs having a St. Patrick's Day treat. We do make those over in the commissary along with birthday cakes and other fun things like that. And then I wanted to note this, even though it's a very old picture, because as you can see, it's from our old children's zoo, but these conveyor timers that we have now all over the zoo. This was one of the first ones we put up over in children's zoo over for the raccoons. And as you can see, it has 3 PVC pipes coming down. Well, there are lanes on the belt. And as this goes over an 8-hour period, wherever the food is on the lane, it drops into one of the different pipes. And the raccoons never know when it's coming, where it's coming. And so it encourages them and all of our animals to explore their environment more, to be engaged and to be vigilant because they don't know when the food is coming. And that's very important so that our animals, because animals don't eat at 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. in nature. They're eating all the time. So this is actually a much more natural way for us to feed them so that they get food throughout the course of the day. And I just put on here because everybody thinks of carnivores and herbivores, but as nature doesn't waste anything, there is an animal that will eat every part of everything. I just think this is really interesting, but it gives you some new vocabulary words to try on Scrabble. So just to briefly go over some of our current projects, we've got, of course, our wonderful pangolins. Diet was one of the things that made them more difficult to keep in a managed care situation than a lot of other animals. So we've worked very hard on the diet. The unfortunate thing is we don't know what normal is. We don't have any idea what their normal consumption amounts are supposed to be, the concentrations of things in their diets. I've had ants analyzed, but we've only had maybe 2 or 3 different samples that we've been able to analyze, and they've been from different countries. So we haven't been able to get a set amount and a good recommendation for what the nutrient levels should be in their diet. And then on the other side, what their blood value should be. We've been measuring the mineral and vitamin concentrations of our pangolins for a few years. And again, we don't know what normal is. We don't know what normal is for a lot of our animals in managed care because there are very few researchers going out and collecting blood. Blood is the gold standard for us to be able to measure and know what is normal for any of our animals. But it's becoming less and less frequent that gets done. So we're losing out on not knowing what we're trying to aim for when we're doing our diets here. We're also doing a research project on passerines. Tim Snyder, the curator of birds, and I have been working on this for probably the last 8 or 10 years. And the reason why it's taking so long is we have to make one change in the diet because we don't want to change too many variables. And then we have to wait for the next breeding season to see if it worked. So the problem we've seen is we've had poor chick survivability, and we didn't know why, but we were pretty sure after we had eliminated all other environmental issues that it had to be the diet. So we changed one nutrient and waited a breeding season, and then we saw an improvement, but then we saw a deficiency in another nutrient. So we made that change and we waited another breeding season. So we've made several different changes. We think we're getting very close now. We've worked with Missouri, that company that I talked about in the beginning, to make a custom diet for us that is to my specifications with the increases and decreases in specific nutrients that we think we need. And this is our first breeding season trying that custom diet. So fingers crossed, we'll see if we get some good outcomes this year. And then I put this in there because I didn't know how much they were going to talk about me, but I'm almost out of time. So here's a little bit about me. I like Katie said, I've been here for 13 years. And then just it shows, since there are so few of us nutritionists, we get involved in a lot of different things. So I'm the nutrition advisor for many different SSPs and tags, but we're always happy to help. And we want to try to impress on people how important it is to have a nutritionist on staff. So that is it. And hopefully I will take some questions.
Thank you very much. That was very fascinating. I learned a lot myself, so really appreciate you doing this for us. And I want to circle back to the pangolins. I know that you were saying that you're still trying to figure out what normal is. Mm-hmm. So I was wondering if you could shed some light on what the diet is for the pangolins living at Brookfield Zoo.
Oh, sure. It is an insect-based diet, and I think that's why it's been more successful than other attempts in the past. So we have, I think it's 3 or 4 different ground insects. Some larvae, some mealworms, and some crickets, and then some supplements. But the interesting thing is we actually take all the dry ingredients and we mix it with water with agar in it. So it turns into like a semi-solid. It's a very squishy, wet solid, but it's able to be broken up. We put it through a food processor, and those nice little pieces are perfect for the pangolins to be able to get it to stick to their tongue and then ingest it, because pangolins have a very small mouth opening. They don't have any teeth and they just have that sticky tongue. So getting the diet into a form that made it easy for them to ingest was just as important as getting the nutrient composition right.
It seems that when you're looking at getting nutrient compositions right, looking at species of animals, even animals as individuals, it can be extremely hard to nail down the right diet, I would imagine. And so I was wondering, out of all the species you've dealt with, do you have one species that you would classify, I guess, as the pickiest eater?
Oh, gosh. Like I said earlier, I mean, pickiest probably would have to go to either the binturongs, which you wouldn't think would be that picky because they are carnivorous fruit eater. They kind of eat everything, but in the past, not so much right now, but in the past, I have had some very, very picky binturongs that I couldn't have just one diet for the 3 individuals that we had, each individual had their own specific diet. One of them had hard-boiled eggs, one of them didn't, one of them liked broccoli, one of them didn't. And it just was, they were just very tailored diets for each individual in that case.
So I would imagine with those, the need for such tailored diets, and then looking at how much produce you go through, has there ever been any thought to, or is the zoo at all growing any produce or any other type of food on grounds for the animals?
Unfortunately not. We have looked into hydroponics and aquaponics at times and vertical feeders. Unfortunately, most of that is greens based, and we just would not be able to produce the level of greens that we go through on a daily basis. The gorillas themselves eat about 60 pounds of greens a day. So we would wipe ourselves out within a day. So yeah, unfortunately we do, prior to COVID, we did take donations from both Whole Foods and Costco. And I would like to pursue the possibility of some of those other produce providers, to look at donations as well.
Now, this seems to be, I could be mistaken, but it seems to be a very specialized field to some degree. So I was wondering, if we have students that are in high school or even in college, are there specific classes they should be looking at, or is there anything else they can do to prepare themselves for this type of career?
I mean, definitely following through on biology and math are very important. Unfortunately, there is no exotic animal nutrition major anywhere. So what I did, I had one exotic animal nutrition class in my animal science department that I was able to take. So I went to a state school that had an animal science department. Of course, all of that learning was based on livestock, but they kind of had some side classes that you could take in nutrition and different animal, besides just cows and pigs and chickens and those kinds of things. But yeah, I would definitely, if you're interested in nutrition, to follow through with going through an animal science department. And then what I tell a lot of people is you're going to likely have to go to graduate school, just because there are so few jobs. A lot of us just went to school until we could get a job. But you have to look for the professor, because again, there's no field, there's no centralized exotic animal nutrition field or major or focus at a university. So I've told people, just look at papers that you're interested in, find the principal investigator, contact them and say, I'm interested in what you're doing, because there's a guy at University of British Columbia who works on sea lions, and there's somebody at University of Alabama who works on bats, and you just have to find them.
Thank you. That's very good advice. I think that's going to help people move in the right direction. Now, did have one of our attendees wanted to have some more information about animals, say if they're underweight. I know that you talked about some of that competition that you may have in a group setting. If you have an underweight animal, is there ever a need to have that animal isolated from the group so as to make sure that animal can get the nutrition that it needs?
Sometimes, and that's one of the things that we'll do. If we call it target feeding. So we give the other animals whatever food that they're supposed to have, and then we try to target feed the particular animal that's underweight, either by separation. We've done that sometimes with some equid species. They can't be separated for long, but we try to keep them separated for as long as they'll that one animal to eat. Or if they're tractable enough, sometimes we can hand feed them some pellets or chow, because they come up to the keepers. It's the same concept as when we had overweight animals. It's separating the animals for a certain period of time, hand feeding them their individual diets, and then putting them back together into a group. That's what we had to do with our spider monkeys when our spider monkeys were overweight, but they learned over time, the keepers would increase the times that they were separated, that they would eat. They'd have enough time to eat their diets before they got reunited.
Now, I know with primates, that's one speciality, but then you move over into animals such as your reptiles,
Mhm.
especially when you're taking a look at something as specialized as snakes.
Right.
And I know there's been a lot of questions, with hobbyists about snakes. Do they eat only whole food, or can they eat sectioned food?
Mhm.
Do they only eat live food, or can snakes actually be conditioned to eat euthanized food? So I was
Right.
wondering if you could shed some light on some of those
Sure.
questions.
We, as a nutritionist, I prefer whole prey, hands down, all the time. Simply because that's how they were conditioned to eat. And it provides the organ meat that is really chock full of vitamins and minerals. That also helps if they consume the bones, that's a good source of calcium for them. All of that is optimal for the animals. I mean, if you have to feed them section pieces, I like to say try cross-sectional pieces. So that way you're still kind of getting all of the different parts in there. We condition all of our animals are conditioned to eat frozen thawed. We do occasionally have either young animals or sick animals that may not eat frozen thawed, and that we do have to get some live animals. We usually use, there's usually smaller snakes that we can do with live pinkies or fuzzies, but we try to minimize that as much as possible, and it's only in last case scenarios that we will do that if needed. Some people have trained their snakes to eat the little sausages of complete nutritional. I have a picture of a snake eating one. It's not very easy to do, but you can train your snake to eat some of those complete formulated feeds.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now imagine with all these specialized diets, I would assume the pandemic had to have some effect on how you were able to access and get different diets. Can you talk to us a bit about that, and maybe tell us how you were able to navigate through some of those quagmires?
Sure. Just the supply was our biggest concern. We stocked up quite a bit in March and April when we weren't sure how the supply chain was going to be affected. Most of our businesses have been able to go through the pandemic with a little hit, but not very much. We didn't see as much of a hit on commodities as we thought we would. We thought that those would get depleted, and then we'd have problems with the formulators actually being able to make the complete feed diets. But that actually didn't happen, and very happy about that. I think the biggest issue just overall has just been the delay in shipping. Both the global delay, the shortage of trucks, all of that, just the whole shipping industry has been delayed overall. And so sometimes we've been hit with that. But since we use a lot of local, that hasn't been as much of an issue for us.
Excellent. Well, thank you for answering that. Now, our next question revolves around how you might take a look at treats such as peanut butter, and say, for example, if a certain area in the zoo is offering peanut butter as a treat and they get a whole jar of peanut butter, how are the calories then figured into the diet if a certain area has a whole jar?
Yes. So most of our primates and most of our omnivores are given daily calorie amounts that they're allowed for enrichment. And what I've done is I've given the keepers a list of all the enrichment foods and how many calories per gram each food contains. And so if their animal's allowed 100 kcals per day, if they want to give them applesauce that day, that means they can give them 300 grams, or about a half a pound. If they want to give them peanut butter, no, they're only allowed to give them an ounce of peanut butter, because peanut butter is so much calorically denser than applesauce. So they have that whole list to be able to pull from. And this is where the trust comes in between myself and the keepers, that I'm trusting them to feed out what I've prescribed for each animal. and also the experience of my keepers at the commissary, because they can look at an area's food order sheet and go, you know what, they just ordered a tub of peanut butter last week and they're asking for another one this week. What's going on? And my commissary keepers are actually very good at that. They've been doing this enough that they know what everybody's supposed to be ordering and they know when things are off. So we have two-way, we have a little stopgap at the commissary that not all the keepers know, that we're pretty aware of what their usual orders are.
Jen, if there was one thing you could leave our guests with this evening in regards to animal nutrition that maybe even able to help us with our animals at home, what might that be?
Oh, wow. Probably I think variety is really key. Giving your dogs and cats dry cat food, dry dog food is important. It gives them all the nutrients they need, but every once in a while, throw in a raw egg, or give them some raw meat. I mean, things that are appropriate for pets, not to give them human food as an alternative, because that can get out of the way. That can get crazy very quickly. But yeah, I think introducing variety and maintaining that, because the psychological health of the animals is just as important as their physical health.
Well, I think my dogs sensed you say that raw egg, and after this evening and hearing your final parting words, I'm going to have to step my game up with my dogs here. But we really appreciate you being with us this evening and sharing everything that you did about Zoo Nutrition, especially the parting words. Do want to thank everybody who has joined us this evening. We really appreciate you, and we invite you to join us on May 12th as we start to learn about the importance of veterinary technicians to animal care and welfare at Brookfield Zoo. So with that, have a wonderful evening, everyone. Be safe, be well, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.